Well, welcome to this discussion on French real estate. It's the first in a series that PCD is producing in partnership with Enness Group. We're looking forward to creating some great content over the months ahead, sharing insight from some of the key European property markets. I'm joined by an expert panel here today, who I'm going to bring in shortly, covering all aspects of tax, legal, wealth structuring and financing of French real estate. But first of all, just to open up the discussion, I'm going to come to Hugh Wade-Jones, co-founder of Enness Group. Welcome, Hugh.
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So just at a high level, Hugh, from what you see down in Monaco, you provide financing for high and ultra high net worth clients in property all around the world. Where do you see French real estate fitting into the global picture for luxury real estate?
Yeah, so I guess sort of to touch on the kind of global position of real estate, there's undoubtedly been a slowdown in transactional numbers. I think the reality of that, though, and probably what we've seen developing as a trend, even from maybe the sort of first data that came out of the pandemic, was that's more of an enforced slowdown rather than a sort of lack of demand, as it were. I think we're still seeing huge demand, especially for the top end real estate. Maybe going back one step to London, which is kind of maybe where Enness is anchored to a certain extent. The focus is very much, we're seeing on luxury, on top end, properties that are highly amenitized. People have to be in the centre of town. They want the swimming pool, they want the concierge, they want a bit of outside space if possible. Certainly a number of very top end developments in Mayfair, which are linked to the hotel chains. The Four Seasons residence in Grosvenor Square, the Mandarin Oriental in Hanover Square. These kind of developments are very popular. So real focus on luxury and top ends, and possibly less of a focus necessarily on driving down bargains, which is unusual because obviously one would think now in a time of uncertainty that would be what people are looking for, to take opportunities. There's been a lot of talk in the press of sort of that escape to the country, so big boom and these people moving away. I think for myself and ourselves at Enness, that deal very much at the top end, it's less of an escape down the M3 for a bit more garden space, and very much more an international pay, that people are looking at multiple foreign homes, giving themselves various options should something similar or approaching to what we've been through in the last 12 months happen again. Very popular areas we're seeing globally, the Balearics, especially Ibiza, St. Bart's for the ultra high net worth community. Increasingly we're seeing more and more in Portugal, where properties maybe that were worth 1 to 3 million are now potentially worth double that or even more. Coming back round to what we're here to talk about today, and what actually you asked, is that of French real estate and where that sits. And that very much always is front and centre of any high net worth, ultra high net worth property portfolio. Simply the reason for that is that to some people it's sort of seen as a kind of a jewel in the crown, if you like, and all the cliches that one can come up with at the moment, but very much the French property market, real coiled spring where international buyers very much looking to get back into France, start viewing properties and transacting. So very, very busy at the moment in France.
And just breaking that down then by region for international investors, where are the key hotspots for activity in deals and in financing? Which are the hot areas that you see?
Well, I mean, in the most simplistic view, I guess one would break it down into three parts. But obviously, you have Paris. The Parisian market is still very robust, and I think what we're seeing there is there's a real array of international buyers that buy into Paris. So the Middle Eastern buyers have great affinity with Paris. The Americans or the Midnight in Paris, the romance of it all, still looking to buy into it. And even a lot of the Asian market, a lot of Chinese buyers, not a lot, but increasing numbers that we're seeing. And I think in Paris, what we see is that demand is still outstripping supply. So prices are strong, activity is good. The next area will be the Alps. I think an interesting one at the moment is obviously the ski resorts are closed. So a bit like sort of Saint-Tropez, if the beaches were closed, what happens? A hard one to call in terms of kind of transactional activity, but certainly from a lending perspective, I think a lot of the banks are maybe overexposed to what we would class as AAA resorts like Courchevel. The banks are being a lot more bearish on their lending in those resorts, so it's a bit trickier. And then obviously down in the south of France, where I'm based and where Enness have their office, I mean, the usual demand for the big trophies, slower activity levels, but the banks are sitting on a lot of money at the moment. There really is that kind of demand to get that cash out the door, and no one's going to get it out the door, like the areas that we're talking about. So anywhere from Menton along to Cap de Nice is very busy, even in Provence. I know Liam, who will speak a little bit later, is looking at a large transaction there. And the borrowing opportunities are very good. The borrowing has never been cheaper. Sounds quite cliched. It's the same in the UK, but whack off 3/4, 1% off the rates in the UK, and you get an idea of just how cheap it is to borrow here.
And in terms of Brexit, has there been any noticeable impact for you in terms of putting the financing together, or just generally on the demand side? Has it figured for you?
Well, no, I think Brexit's very, very 2020, David.
Yeah.
I think we're well past that now. So we're sort of, I think people have completely forgotten about that already, with everything that's going on and the chaos that we have in the world. So I think the news is good from a Brexit perspective. I think it's gone relatively unnoticed in the property market. I think certainly down here, there's a big British presence, and the pound is 5 or 6% stronger than maybe even it was 2 or 3 months ago. I've used the phrase previously, but that coiled spring of, I know there's huge numbers of buyers that are looking, or potential buyers that are looking to come down and view properties, Saint-Tropez in particular. And I think it's maybe going a bit more holistically. I think it's just one of these things that maybe it's a dream or a vision that people have had for years, but now actually they want to realize that they probably realize time isn't on their side, that the life is unpredictable and all these things that may happen. So I think we will see, maybe not the floodgates open, that would be a little too strong a phrase. But when international travel is allowed again, sort of in the summer, I think it'll be a very busy time. And as a bit of a counterbalance to all this positivity, because obviously it has been a strange period in the property and financial markets. One of the sort of things that does sit in the background are those of inflationary pressures that people talk about. But I think it is very much that property, amongst everything else, is one of the best hedges that you can have against inflation. So in a world where cash in your bank is virtually worthless, any kind of asset that you can tangibly hold, live in, or spend a lockdown in it's got to be good. So I think the news is positive. The borrowing conditions are very favourable in France, and it's still ultra desirable for numerous reasons.
Okay, thank you. Well, just to bring in now Frederic Mege from Rowland in Monaco. Welcome, Frederic. Perhaps you could just give us a sense of the buying process and conveyancing for foreign investors looking to buy a residential property in France.
So in France, a purchaser will need a notary to help with the acquisition process. The notary will actually make sure that for instance, the seller has got a good title. He will do the more normal checks on the property regarding the planning permissions, things like this. And something important to mention is that purchasers should be aware that they don't need to appoint the seller notary. They can have their own notary to act for them, because sometimes people don't know that. So a notary actually does. You can have, as a buyer, you can have your own notary acting only for you. So I think it's good to know, because I always advise my clients to have the own notary, because it's better to have two separate notaries acting for both the buyer and the seller. So basically, usually, I would say that notaries in France don't usually give French tax advice or tax structuring advice. So it's always good to have a lawyer involved too in the acquisition process.
And thanks for that. And what are the tax considerations for someone intending to buy and live or reside in a property in France?
So there are many taxes to consider, but I would say Stamp duty, obviously, but there is nothing to do in terms of tax planning with stamp duty. Capital gains tax, local taxes, like what we call the taxe foncière, taxe d'habitation. Also income tax when the property when the property generates income, for instance. But the two main taxes to consider are, the first one is the real estate wealth tax, and the second one is the French inheritance tax. So I mean, just briefly, let's look at these two taxes. So the real estate wealth tax has been in force since 2018. Sorry, it replaced the previous general wealth tax. So the real estate wealth tax only apply on French real estate not used for the purposes of a business activity. So basically, a client, a foreign, an international client buying a residential property in France will be subject to this tax. If the net market value of the property exceeds 1.3 million euros. So there are progressive rates. So the tax can be quite high actually, because the higher rate is 1.5%, and it applies for properties above 10 million euros. So it can be quite very high tax liability. There are solutions to mitigate or avoid this tax. The first one, the most obvious one, is to have a bank financing, a bank loan. But now the legislation is actually is more restrictive, because now there are restrictions in respect of only interest loans, which are not fully deductible. So there is a formula in the French tax legislation, which actually gives the annual deductibility of the loan, like a kind of deemed annuity. And so the first advice I would give for clients to consider maybe long-term loans instead of short-term loans, to reduce the effect of the formula, because we have to use a formula to determine the deductible annuity. Shareholders' loans are not deductible, like they were not deductible in the previous wealth tax. Also, maybe third-party loans, so they could be deductible. There are there are ways maybe to allow a deductibility of shareholders' loan, but they have to be granted on the it's quite a difficult word expression for me to say in English, arm's length basis. So that's an important point. There are in addition to the financing, there are other solutions to mitigate the taxability, the real estate wealth taxability. So it's quite a simple solution actually, is to consider splitting the ownership of the property, and more preferably splitting the ownership of the shares owning the property. Why? Because the inheritance tax liability for the wealth tax liability we apply progressive rates. So the higher the value of the property is, the higher the rate which will give a higher tax liability. So if we say, like, we have a property of 5 million euros and we split the ownership of the property between 5 different taxpayers, so you will have a value of 1 million for each taxpayer. So 1 million will be below the threshold of 1.3. Just to give you an example of how it works. So the idea would be, for instance, to involve using an SCI and involve your children in the acquisition. And the good thing is, not minor children, but adult children, because from a French tax group, from the real estate wealth tax, the adult children are taxed separately. They are not taxed with the parents. So it could be it's often we advise clients to consider actually involving the children in the acquisition. And also involving the children in the acquisition help for the inheritance tax, obviously, on death. So the other taxes to consider is indeed inheritance tax. So in France, the progressive rates apply for transfers in the direct line. So for instance, obviously to children. So the rates are from 5 to 45%, and the rate of 45% apply for shares in the estate of more than 1.8 million euros. So the taxability also can be quite high here. I mean, we're considering, for instance, high value properties in France. So the good thing in France is that death transferred between spouses are not taxed, which is good. And also there are solutions to mitigate the inheritance tax liability by using, again, a company with a properly structured with debt. So because the debt will reduce the value of, obviously, of the shares subject to French inheritance tax. Another point to mention here is that the use of Monégasque SCI, because often people think about French SCI, but in Monaco, we also have Monégasque SCI. A Monégasque SCI, instead of a French SCI, will help to mitigate French inheritance tax. This is why they are often used by foreigners. So I'm not going to explain you in detail how it works, but you have to, just the idea is to remember that also sometimes Monégasque SCI can be considered to buy a property in France. Structuring an acquisition in France, quite simple. So we're not going to use like an offshore company. I will not advise a client to use an offshore company, like a BVI company. It's just crazy, because then you enter into different tax regime of taxes with corporation tax. It could be a nightmare. So basically, it's quite straightforward. We will use direct ownership, but maybe sometime the use of an SCI, French or Monégasque SCIs. So in terms of structuring, it's not very complex. It's not too sophisticated. And French tax legislation doesn't like when it's too sophisticated. They like using, for instance, offshore entities.
Do these considerations change for investment properties?
So in France, we distinguish between two tax treatments, depending on whether the property is let furnished or unfurnished. But the main principles to retain here that it's always better, because it's more tax efficient, to let a property furnished, like a seasonal lettings. Why? Because you have in France, you have a special regime which applies, which allow you to deduct 50% of the gross income as expenses. So for instance, if you do every year a gross income of 50,000 euros, you will only be taxed on 25,000 euros. Something also to mention, when you use an SCI, usually it's not advisable to do furnished lettings with an SCI. Because why? Because the SCI may become subject to French corporation tax, and it's not good to have an SCI subject to French corporation tax for two main reasons. The first one is that the free use of the property would generate a corporation tax liability on the deemed income, and also capital gains tax will be calculated in accordance with the corporation tax rules, which will require to use a depreciation. And depreciation means the longer the SCI owns the property, the higher will be the taxability. Okay, but there are solutions to avoid, when you do furnished letting with an SCI, there are solutions to avoid corporation tax by doing the letting yourself as a shareholders. Again, it's a bit complicated to explain this solution here, but there are solutions.
Thanks, Frederic. And at what point would an owner-occupier become French tax resident?
The mere ownership of a French property doesn't trigger a potential risk of becoming French tax resident. It's actually the use of the property which could be an issue. If, for instance, the property become the habitual home of the owner, yes, it could be an issue. But just owning in France a residential property, a secondary home, doesn't usually trigger French tax residency issues.
Well, thanks for that, Frederic. I'd just like to bring in Sylvia Andriotto from JTC Group in Monaco. Good afternoon, Sylvia.
Good afternoon, David, and thank you very much for inviting us, JTC Group, to attend your webinars and to contribute to your webinars.
Pleasure. So we heard from Frederic there some of the tax considerations. Perhaps you could give us a sense of how you might implement structures owning French real estate from Monaco.
Absolutely. So a little bit of background. When it comes of investing in France and therefore buying a property, buying a real estate, or even building a new property, there are not many vehicles actually you could consider to hold these properties. Normally, the standard vehicle that is used to hold the real estate is either an SCE, Société Civile Immobilière, or an SCP, Société Civile Patrimoniale. This type of companies are non-trading companies, are purely holding vehicles. But the difference in between this type of vehicles and a standard holding company, as we can think about of, I don't know, holding company in Switzerland, a holding company in the UK, holding companies tend to own businesses, right? Whereas the SCI and SCP tend to hold the assets that could span from real estate, but not only. In fact, the Société Civile Immobilière normally hold real estate, apartments, large properties. Société Civile Patrimoniale can also hold different type of assets, such as equities in companies or bankable assets, different type of assets, right? These holding companies are actually very much used for foreign investors, so people not necessarily already living in France. This type of companies have the advantage of being very discreet, in the sense that when the companies get incorporated, they are not necessarily, the incorporation of these companies is not necessarily published in the famous Journal de Monaco, so the standard way in Monaco publishes any company gets incorporated. That's very anonymous. And also the shareholders of the company is very anonymous. So you cannot actually get to know who are the shareholders of the company. And these things is very much appreciated, especially in a broad scheme of wealth planning purposes. Now, this type of companies is pretty easily set up. It doesn't take more than 2 to 3 weeks. And the advantage is also that you don't necessarily need to be resident in Monaco to get this company incorporated. You could be resident in Switzerland or resident in your country of origin and still incorporate a company in Monaco that holds a French real estate. So this company can be easily set up in Monaco, not only in Monaco, of course, you can incorporate also in France, this type of company. There are tax reasons why often clients decide to incorporate the company in Monaco, but I'm sure that Frederic can better explain what are the tax reasons why clients decide to incorporate the company in Monaco. In terms of legal references, there is just a pretty old legal reference for this type of company of 1966, and it's actually a pretty simple vehicle to be incorporated. It doesn't take too much time, and it doesn't take it doesn't imply a lot of costs, if you like. So we can definitely assist when it comes of clients wanting to have either a base or a second house or a third house in the French area. We are often asked to act when it comes of properties purchased, especially in the south of France. So I'm talking about Cannes, I'm talking about Saint-Tropez, but also Villefranche or Roquebrune, these areas. So dreams area for a lot of private clients.
Thank you. And I mean, what are some of the ongoing considerations then once you've established your structure as a corporate service provider? You're making filings, you're administering the structure. I mean, perhaps give us a sense of what ongoing role you might have when working with clients.
Yeah, so definitely the company, it doesn't have a lot of requirements, but few for sure. It definitely has to have an address in Monaco. You can domicile the company either at a business center, or if the local authority agrees, you can also domicile potentially the company at your premises in Monaco, which is pretty peculiar. So you can definitely have the company owning your real estate at your premises, but this is subject to authorization. So the address, obviously, as I said before, you don't need to be resident in Monaco, but something else that you need to consider is that you want to have the accounting, of course, for the company. And so you will need to call in an accountant able to run the accounting for the company and produce the financial statements, of course, once a year. These are, if you like, in a nutshell, what are the, on an administrative point of view, the implications of having a Société Civile, yes.
Okay, thank you. And we heard from Hugh at the start that, you know, French real estate fits in the Premier League of global luxury property. I mean, from your base in Monaco, is that what you see? Have you noticed any trends in COVID about types of properties people are buying? Anything that's newly emerging, or nationalities of client that is coming and investing, perhaps in the south coast of France?
Yeah, definitely. It's actually a very interesting question because due to the pandemic, I think people realized the importance of having a very comfortable place where to live, right? And where else in the world you could think about having a very comfortable house, maybe with a sea view, if not in the south of France, right? So I have to say that the market here in the south of France for real estate stays active. There is a lot of interest from potential from foreign investors from Switzerland, from Germany, from the UK as well. From the UK as well, and from Russia. Russians specifically like the French Riviera, and they like Monaco, but they like the French Riviera a lot. So I have an example, for instance, a client of our JTC private office division that with the family decided from the Ukraine to relocate into Switzerland. And thanks to JTC private office, we were able to relocate the entire family to Switzerland. The client in particular wanted also to set up his own business in Switzerland. So we assisted him on a corporate point of view, setting up his business in Switzerland. We assisted the family on the relocation to Switzerland. We additionally offered a consolidation type of service, taking the full picture of his wealth into consideration and pulling everything into a software that we offer to our private clients. The software name is Edge. So a various type of services to these private clients, but in particular, coming back to the point, he wanted to buy a property in Cannes. So he asked us to support him in the acquisition of the property in Cannes. That obviously it was our job to incorporate afterwards the company in Monaco, Société Civile Immobilière, for holding the real estate in Cannes. So if you like, in the global picture of the wealth planning for the private client entered also the incorporation of the Société Civile to hold a French property. So this is, in a nutshell, an example we could give of assistance to private clients, foreign investors from abroad. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And what do you find the first time foreign investors underestimate most about buying in France? What catches them out? I imagine the private office service is more than simply the administration. It's about helping in any aspect of a client's life when they're very wealthy and plugging into your services. So what is it that people underestimate, and how do you help them overcome some of these hurdles?
Absolutely. So we like, our slogan at JTC Private Office is time is the new luxury. And clients often underestimate the amount of time that is required in order to set up things in the appropriate way in the particular jurisdiction you intend to do business, right? All the administration, all the time that is needed. So we try and we do our best to successfully save time for our clients, right? So what our added value is actually making them gaining in one of their most precious assets, their time. And if there is something that is underestimated, is often talking about France specifically, Frederic can confirm, the tax burden. But not only in terms of amount of taxes that is due, but in terms of the cumbersome procedure is often required for the tax filing and for all the tax reporting that is required in France. So this is what I would answer to the question, what is normally underestimated. But we are here to assist and to help, so you have already the solution in front of you.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for that.
Thank you,
Sylvia. Very, very helpful. Just to bring in Liam Wilkinson, who's the principal representative for France for Enness. Good afternoon, Liam.
Hi, David. I think first and foremost, I would just second what Hugh's mentioned earlier. The appetite for lending in France still remains strong. There's a very stable housing market down here in the south of France, and we have historically low mortgage rates for residents and also non-residents. I think I'd add one more point to what Hugh touched on earlier. there's certainly been in the south of France a movement in the last 2 or 3 years, whereby before it was very much a buyer's market, so people from the UK or overseas, they would have quite a lot of power in negotiations, whereas now it's, after talking to a few agents down here, it's moving more towards a seller's market, whereby there's a strong domestic demand, and that's been driven by the Parisians, and as Sylvia mentioned, the Swiss clients entering into the market and really driving prices. So I think one of the key points post Brexit for international clients looking to buy into France is to get pre-qualified, because you're no longer you're no longer a stronghold client moving into the market. There's a lot of competition. You want to, when you land in Nice, to have a strong indication of where you are, where you're at, and how you stand. So I think that's one of the things which now also the agents are pushing with the clients, and how Enness Global Mortgages help agents and introducers. Everyone kind of knows where they stand. In terms of the mortgage market, there's certainly been a change with French retail banks. They're now asking for a letter of high net worth to even enter into a mortgage discussion, and that would be defined as an income above 150,000 sterling or net assets above 500,000 sterling. So immediately, whenever I speak to clients and they're looking for like a retail mortgage, in the region of 80 to 85% capital repayment, it's the first question we ask. And actually, because of that request now, it certainly narrows down the pool of buyers, or who would even get through the front door of the mortgage process. And that's not ideal at the moment with the poor currency exchange. I mean, it's improved over the last couple of months, but historically it's still quite low. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of where the retail banks are at. In terms of the next kind of option that I'd look at if the client didn't fit with a retail bank, I'd go to a challenger bank. Now, a challenger bank is what I would say best fits Enness Global Mortgages, and that's why. It's because normally it's a high net worth individual who might be a business owner, who might not have the salary cap of 150,000, but they may have business assets. They may be quite early on in their trajectory of wealth, and they need to have that sit down meeting with a banker and just discuss where they're going and how they can work together. And certainly with the challenger banks, they're more attractive than the retail banks in terms of pricing. Most retail banks will give you a 25-year repayment mortgage at 2.3, 2.4%, whereas I've closed deals in Paris of 1.2% fixed over 20 years. So that's kind of how we earn our stripes as well. I mean, we merit our fee on that. So that's an interesting point. And whenever I speak to clients and business introducers, we always say that the French retail banks, one, they're quite difficult to work with because they have such a narrow-minded way of looking at underwriting, the debt to income ratios, this high net worth statement. And we always suggest that the smaller challenger banks, which might not be totally accessible to all other brokers because they are quite niche, they're subsidiaries of a large private bank, they're not loud, they're quite discreet. I think that's kind of how we add value within the process, by having these kind of connections and having our feet very much on the ground here in the south of France. So yeah, I mean, what I would say is post Brexit, there's still plenty of mortgage solutions out there, but be prepared. Yeah.
Thanks. And what are some of the common misconceptions for people who are just looking into the financing side for the first time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very good question, and it's one that need to always, obviously, like with Enness and my understanding of the UK mortgage market and how sophisticated that mortgage market is, it's very different to the European way of doing mortgages. In one way, we have countless, maybe 15, 20 phone calls a week from clients saying, look, I found this excellent rental property in the south of France, in Cannes, in Nice. The agents provided 5 years worth of rental income. Standalone, that kind of works. And like from a UK mortgage, if a client fits with that kind of profile, that kind of property in the UK, it normally pass with very little paperwork. Whereas over here, there's very much an underwriting of, okay, it's a great property, great location, but if that property is not rented or something like COVID happens, how does your income and your debt actually work with this property? So the Bank of France actually brought in 2020 as a means of slowing down the mortgage market a strict lending criteria, whereby you can only have from your disposable income, so all income minus tax, fixed expenditures, you can only afford 33% of your disposable income to go towards a French mortgage. So if you look at the numbers, it certainly makes it slightly more difficult when you have a buy-to-let property investor in the UK with 15, 20 buy-to-lets, and they come over to France and they may have a low 3-year average income in the UK. They've used that UK kind of mindset of, okay, this is a great property investment opportunity, but when they go through the underwriting process with the French banks, they suddenly come up against the European way of underwriting a mortgage. And part of our job is to provide guidelines, but also educate the clients on how it works. But also we can make some suggestions on how by presenting the file in this type of way, how we can make this work. It's very much a complex matter, but that's kind of our job. We're here to help and provide those insights into the market.
We heard from Sylvia about the international demand coming from all over the world, but particularly, from Russia and other parts. I imagine that French retail banks might find it hard to assess and deal with international sophisticated clients that aren't domestically already based. So how as broker might you help some of the international clients looking to buy in France?
Yes, certainly. I mean, as Sylvia mentioned, but if with some of these high net worth clients looking to move down to the south of France or have a second residency here, with any kind of property between 2 to 5 million euros, they're going to have global assets. And with Enness Global Mortgages, with our office in London, Dubai, here in Monaco, Jersey, I mean, we have a very large panel of banks who will look at a client not just on the standalone French mortgage, but the bigger picture. And I think that's kind of how, whenever we go into discussions with banks, we may say, well, look, we know that you have a lending capacity in the UK. So, this mortgage down here in the south of France, 60, 70% loan to value position, between the two, it kind of works. And then I think then when we then go into negotiations of rates and all these different things, we then as a broker can say to the bank, well, if you win the client on this deal in the south of France and you build that relationship, there's no reason why you then cannot look at other global assets of the client in London, in Switzerland, or different jurisdictions which work with the bank.
Okay, thanks. And just to finish, Liam, perhaps you could give us a couple of example transactions that you've got on your desk at the moment you're working on right now.
Yeah, sure. Down here in the south of France, we've completed several large mortgages, but also we're not shy to look around the €1 million marker. So we're just completing a deal now in Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat. It's a very small villa for that location at €985,000. Finnish national, Swiss resident, fit with the retail bank, the salaried employee, historically income over the last 10 years. As I said, with the retail bank, it ticks a lot of boxes and relatively straightforward on the underwriting. So yeah, 985,000 purchase price. We got a 70% loan to value facility, interest only, 14-year fixed at 2.35%. That's March 2021, so it's very up to date. A client that we're working on now and should be closing very soon was very fitting with a French challenger bank. French national, UK resident for the last 5 years, buy to let property in Paris at 1.5 million euro, 1.5 million euros. They preferred to have a capital repayment because the interest rate was so low, 0.95% fixed over 15 years. The private bank financed 100% of the 1.5, and they requested 28% of assets under management.
Thank you for that. Very, very helpful. We're going to open up the floor for questions shortly with our audience. But before we do that, I'm just going to ask a question of our panelists. Perhaps Sylvia, I will start with you. If you could buy a dream French property, what kind of property would it be, and where do you think it would be? Just to put you on the spot there. If money was no object, where would you be owning in France? Would it be the vineyard, the city pad?
Well, I very much like, for instance, it's not very far from Monaco. It's Villefranche. Villefranche, because it's a small village, if you like, but if you're able to get the property a little bit uphill, you have a wonderful sea view. And this actually just 20-25 minutes by car from Monaco and 20-25 minutes by car from the airport. So actually very, very well located and a very, very pretty village.
Perfect. Thanks for that. What about you, Liam? Where would you, money no object, what would you be purchasing?
It's a great question. I've lived down here in the south of France now for almost 10 years. I've actually lived in Cannes, Antibes, Nice, and of course I work in the Monaco office. I would probably say the Cap d'Antibes. My favourite beaches there, Plage Galar, sandy beach, turquoise blue water, excellent bars, and actually I think at the moment the property market around has been quite flat. So I would personally pick Cap d'Antibes. I think you can pick up quite a good deal around there. I think that after speaking to a few agents in that region, the prices are very reasonable historically, and I think it's certainly a place to watch at the moment.
Great. And Frederic, what about you?
I will buy old stone properties in Provence. You see what I mean by old stones property? Old property, obviously, like a old farm or a map in Provence. In the middle of the lavender fields with a nice pool and very nice garden, and also a nice view with no neighbors. It's quite expensive property, this one.
That's great. You, same question for you. Money's no object. Where would your ideal bit of French real estate be?
Money's no object.
Yeah, money's no object. Come on.
The biggest villa, sprawling villa, and I'd cut off probably the end of the peninsula on Cap Ferrat, and I'd take about 4 acres of that on the beach. And oh, thank you very much. So there you go. It's you can share the PCD millions with myself, and you can do that. I love Cap Ferrat.
I agree. Cap Ferrat is very, very beautiful. It's true.
It's just glamorous and all that stuff. It works. It ticks my boxes. I'm a bit of a magpie, so it ticks my boxes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I look forward to opening up the floor now for some questions from our audience.